And welcome back. It's time to finally implement some code splitting. Let's have a look at our files. In order to use code splitting, we need to learn a new syntax. Although, not really a new syntax, but it's this import keyword. Usually, it's at the very top of the files. With Create React App, if we put the import anywhere inside of our code, so not at the top of the file, it's going to know that, this is a dynamic import, and what that means is that I'll only import it when that piece of code is requested. And this happens underneath the hood with Webpack. So by using import, we automatically tell it to code split, which is super, super nice. This time around, let's go to app.js and get started with code splitting. Now, in here in render, with code splitting, let's comment this out. We want something different. With code splitting, we can ideally do this. If this.state.route equals page 1, we're going to return page 1 on route change equals this.on route change. All right, that doesn't look any different, and that's because it's the exact same. But because this is the default page, that's fine. The next part is different. We can say else return this.state.component on route change equals to this.onRouteChange. Holy moly, what just happened? Is this even allowed? I'm going to come back to this. But for now, keep in mind that all we're doing is saying just render page 1. If the route is anything but page 1, then we need to do some sort of funny business here. And let me close off this. Now, first of all, we see that there's a state.component. Where is that coming from? Well, we create it. We say that now we have a state called component. And this component right now will render page 2 or page 3 for us. And for now, we could just leave it as an empty string because we haven't really loaded page 2 or page 3 yet. Now on route change, this is where we do something a little bit different. With no code splitting, we just had this. But with code splitting, we start to use this dynamic import I was telling you about. We're going to have the same logic. If route equals page 1, then this.setState will just have route equal to route. Because for page 1, we just want to keep everything the same, just like we had it before. For the other two, though, which we're going to dynamically import, we're going to have route equals page 2. And right here, because we won't have page 2 accessible to us, because we're not going to be loading it. As a matter of fact, we're not going to import any of these. We're going to import them here, dynamically. When we actually get to this line of JavaScript, as our app is running in our browser, that's when we want to import them or load them. We're going to say import. And by the way, this only works because of Webpack and the way things are set up. If you try to do this in just plain old JavaScript, it'll throw an error because it won't understand what you're trying to do. We're going to say, well, we're going to load the components page 2. So you see that we changed from importing here to importing down here. And this is asynchronous. That means it returns a promise. So we can use the .then to say once this page has been imported, has been downloaded, then we receive the page2 component. And with this received page2 component, we can now set this .set state to have the route of route because it's just page2, but also update the component state, which we have up here, to equal page2. So now we have access to the page2 component through the this.state. I know it looks a little bit weird, but it's just something you have to get used to. By the way, this could also be null, but for now, empty string is fine. We're not going to get worried too much about it. Now we have page2 accessible to us because if the route is page2, we're going to import and download the page2 component. Then we're going to receive that component and update it to our current app state. Now down here, this makes sense, right? We're simply saying that we're accessing this .state.component, and we're able to do this funny syntax that uses JSX because this .state.component is a React component that is page2. I know when people see this first, they really have a hard time with it. I'll show you how you can actually make it cleaner later on, but I want to really show you this point that we're just rendering this component. Let's finish this off. Let's create another else if statement, and this time around, I'm just going to copy and paste here. And we'll do page 3. And this is going to import page 3. We're going to get the page 3 component and load it up here. Now, is this going to work? Well, let's see. I'm not getting any errors here. If I go back to the browser and exit, actually, let's keep the console on. And I click, I get an error. And we get fail to execute create element on document. That's a really, really confusing error, isn't it? Well, let's console log here to see what happens. What is actually going on? What is page2? Is it a component like I said? I mean, it should be, right? Well, let's do console.log page2. Going to save. Click on page2. And all right, I'm getting these errors, but you see over here, I'm logging out the component, but you see that it looks kind of weird. The component is actually under the default property. And this is where our page lies. This is a little gotcha that you'll just have to get used to, but the way you actually access the component to be able to access it as this .state.component in React is to just say .default and then have here .default. Now let's give it a try. Go back, hit page2. Oh, and I still get an error because we need to remove the first line, which used the no code splitting. We have to just have this in our route change. So let me save that. Go back, page2. Look at that. Everything is working, but are we actually code splitting? Did we just implement code splitting? Well, let's check it out. I'm going to go to the network tab. I'm going to clear this, and I'm going to refresh. All right, so nothing's changed so far. Let me make this a little bit bigger. We see the bundle.js file. When I click on page2, I see this at the bottom. Let me try that again. I'm going to refresh again, and we see the bundle.js. I'm going to clear this and see what happens when I click on page2. I get 1.chunk.js, and if I click on 3, I get 0.chunk.js. That's pretty cool. And we see over here, if we click on it, we have our chunk with a bunch of Webpack, but we also see that in this file, we have the page 2 component. We've just implemented code splitting. If we actually go back now and go back to page 2 or page 1, it's not going to reload again because they've already loaded the scripts. But otherwise, when we load up our initial app, page 2 and page 3 component are not part of this bundle.js file. How cool is that? We've just implemented code splitting on our own, and quite simple. It makes a lot of sense. We're simply just removing the imports from the top and importing them only when we need them, only when the user clicks on a route of page 2. Very, very neat. Now, there's one thing that may have caught your eye. Let me show you something. I'm going to close this and run npm run build. And what this does is create React app, creates a build folder ready for production, optimized for you so that you can put it up online for people to visit. You can see over here that it actually shows you the file sizes after gzip, which, by the way, that's something we're going to talk about in the last part of the performance section. We see that we have a main.js that has the JavaScript. We have the main CSS file. But then we also have these two things, the 0 chunk and the 1 chunk. And Webpack builds this automatically for you based on where it sees the import statement. So we were able to actually take off this much bytes or data from our main file. Because if a user never visits page 2 and page 3, we don't need to send that JavaScript their way. Very, very cool. Now, that was code splitting, but there's actually a better way of doing it. And in the next video, I'm going to show you how. I'll see you in that one. Bye-bye.